My name is Alex, and for the last 8 years, I've been married to Emma. On the surface, our life was perfect. A beautiful home, 2 wonderful kids, and a steady routine that kept everything running smoothly. I had a decent job, and Emma was a fantastic mother and wife. But as with most things that seem perfect, cracks started to form. At first, they were subtle, so subtle that I ignored them. It all began about 6 months ago. Emma was the one who changed first, or maybe it was me. She had always been loving and attentive, but recently, I noticed that she was distracted, more distant. I chalked it up to the usual pressures of life. Raising kids, managing a house, and just trying to keep up with everything. But slowly, I started feeling a sense of detachment, as if something deeper was going wrong, something I wasn't ready to admit. I found myself working later, spending more time at the office or hanging out with friends after hours, anything to avoid the tension that had slowly been growing between us. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't long before someone entered my life who made things complicated. Her name was Natalie, a colleague. We had been working on a project together, and our late-night meetings turned into drinks, and eventually things went too far. It wasn't a long affair, and I told myself it was a one-time thing, that I still loved Emma. But it was one of those lies you tell yourself to feel better in the moment, knowing it would all come crashing down. I didn't realize how quickly it would happen. One evening, I was at home, sitting on the couch after the kids had gone to bed. Emma was upstairs, probably reading or getting ready for bed. My phone buzzed, and I glanced down, fully expecting it to be a work message or some random notification. But my heart sank the moment I saw the name on the screen. Natalie. I had been careful, or so I thought, but seeing her name flash up sent a jolt of panic through me. Emma walked into the room just as I picked up the phone. Her eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I wondered if she could sense my panic. I quickly turned the phone screen down on the couch next to me and forced a smile. "Who was that?" she asked, her tone casual but with a hint of curiosity. "No one important," I replied, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. "Just work stuff." She gave me a long, considering look but didn't press the issue. I exhaled quietly, relieved that I had dodged the bullet, at least for now. But that moment, her looking at me with a mix of suspicion and concern, stuck with me. Emma wasn't stupid, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the walls I had built to hide my mistake would crumble. A week later, it happened. It was a Saturday morning, and I was in the garage, pretending to work on some home project that I had no real interest in. Emma was in the house, and the kids were out with my parents. I heard the sound of the garage door opening and turned to see Emma standing there, holding my phone in her hand. The look on her face was something I'll never forget. Her eyes wide, her lips pressed together in a thin, trembling line. "I was looking for your phone to call the plumber," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't angry, not yet. It was just devastated. "And I found this." She tossed the phone at me and I barely caught it. My heart raced as I unlocked it, praying that maybe, somehow it wasn't what I thought it was. But as soon as I opened the screen, there it was, the text message thread with Natalie. All of it laid out, flirtatious messages, plans to meet, and the photos. I froze. There was nothing I could say. There was no excuse that would make this go away. Emma had found everything. Emma stared at me, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly as she crossed her arms over her chest. The silence was unbearable. My mind raced, searching for something, anything, to say. But all I could think about was how stupid I had been to think I could keep this hidden. "How long?" she finally asked, her voice breaking. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. The guilt was suffocating. Finally, I managed to whisper, "It was just once." "Once?" she repeated, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. "Do you really expect me to believe that?" I shook my head, ashamed of the lie I had just told. "It was a mistake, Emma. I swear. I never wanted this to happen." She didn't say anything for what felt like an eternity. Instead, she just looked at me, her expression shifting from hurt to anger. "You didn't want this to happen? You had a choice, Alex. You made a choice to betray me." I wanted to say something to defend myself, but there was nothing I could say that would make it right. She was right. I had made a choice, and now I had to face the consequences. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away, refusing to let herself break down in front of me. I trusted you. I thought we were in this together. How could you do this to us? Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I had no answer for her. The reality of what I had done was finally sinking in, and the weight of my actions was unbearable. Emma didn't leave that night, but she didn't speak to me either. She stayed in the guest room, and I lay awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how things had gotten to this point. My mind kept going back to the look on her face when she found those messages. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt her. It was the realization that everything she thought we had built together was based on a lie. Over the next few days, we barely spoke. Emma withdrew into herself, spending more time away from the house, and when she was home, the silence was suffocating. Our kids noticed the tension, but we tried to shield them from it as best we could. Still, I knew that things would never be the same again. One evening, after another day of strained silence, Emma finally broke. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, her face pale but determined. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said softly, her voice trembling, "but I need time to figure out what I want." And with that, she stood up, leaving me alone with the crushing weight of my mistake. After that conversation at the kitchen table, things didn't improve. Emma had emotionally checked out. She was still physically there, taking care of the kids, going about her daily routine, but there was a distance between us that felt insurmountable. It wasn't the anger that hurt the most. It was the silence, the absence of anything. No more laughter, no more casual conversations, no more shared moments. It was as if she was already gone, and I was left living with the ghost of the woman I once knew. Days turned into weeks, and the tension only grew. I tried everything to make things right, apologizing, begging for her forgiveness, suggesting couples counseling. But every attempt was met with the same cold, detached response: "I need time." It was the only thing she ever said, and it left me feeling more helpless with every passing day. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Emma finally made her decision clear. She sat down next to me on the couch, but she didn't look at me. Instead, she stared ahead at the blank TV screen, her hands resting in her lap. "I think we need to separate for a while," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt my stomach drop. It was something I had feared, but hearing the words out loud made it real in a way I wasn't prepared for. "Emma, please," I started, my voice breaking. "We can fix this. We can work through it." She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again, Alex. Every time I look at you, all I can think about is what you did. I need space. I need time to figure out if this is something I can move past, or if we're just delaying the inevitable." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The thought of being without her, even temporarily, was unbearable. But deep down, I knew she was right. Our marriage was hanging by a thread, and forcing her to stay wasn't going to heal the wound I had caused. "When?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Next week," she replied quietly. "I'll take the kids to my parents for a while. I think it's best if we have some time apart to think about everything." I nodded, though every fiber of my being wanted to scream, to beg her to stay. But I had no right to ask that of her. Not after what I had done. The following week was a blur. Emma packed up her things quietly, carefully. She didn't speak much, and when she did, it was only about logistics, what the kids would need, what she would take with her, and how long she planned to stay at her parents'. The emotional distance between us was suffocating, and every day felt like I was watching my life fall apart in slow motion. When the day finally came for her to leave, I stood in the driveway, watching as she loaded the last of the bags into the car. Our kids were already in the back seat, blissfully unaware of the storm that had torn through our lives. Emma closed the trunk and turned to face me. For a moment, I thought she might say something, anything to give me hope that this wasn't the end. But instead, she simply nodded, her face etched with sadness. "I'll call you about the kids," she said quietly before getting into the car. I stood there, watching as she drove away, the sound of the tires on the gravel driveway the only thing I could hear. And just like that, she was gone. The house felt emptier than it ever had, and for the first time since everything had started, I realized just how much I had lost. The silence was unbearable. That night, I sat in our bedroom, my bedroom now, and stared at the space where Emma's things used to be. Her side of the bed was cold and empty, and the reality of what I had done hit me harder than ever before. I had betrayed the woman I loved, the mother of my children, and now I was facing the consequences. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Without Emma and the kids, the house felt like a hollow shell of what it once was. Every corner reminded me of her, of the life we had built together. The guilt weighed on me like a constant presence, a reminder of how badly I had messed everything up. I tried to keep busy with work, but even there, the reminders of my mistake were unavoidable. Natalie had been transferred to another department after our affair was discovered, but the damage was already done. My colleagues knew. The whispers, the sideways glances. They were always there, a constant reminder of my failure. At night, the loneliness was unbearable. I found myself scrolling through old photos of Emma and the kids, torturing myself with memories of happier times. I would have given anything to go back, to undo what I had done. But I couldn't. All I could do was live with the consequences. Emma and I stayed in touch, but only to talk about the kids. She was distant, cold, and every time we spoke, it felt like I was talking to a stranger. I tried to ask her how she was doing, to see if there was any chance of reconciliation, but she shut me down every time. "I'm not ready to talk about us," she would say, her voice devoid of emotion. "I need more time." And so I waited. Days turned into weeks and then months. Emma stayed with her parents, and I saw the kids on weekends. Every time I picked them up, I would catch a glimpse of Emma through the window, her expression unreadable. I wanted to reach out to her, to tell her how sorry I was, how much I missed her, but I knew it wouldn't matter. I had shattered her trust, and there was no easy way to fix that. After 3 long months of separation, something changed. Emma called me one evening, her voice softer than it had been in months. She asked if we could meet, just the two of us. My heart raced as I agreed, hoping that this was a sign that she was finally ready to talk. We met at a small cafe, the same one where we had gone on our first date all those years ago. I arrived early, nerves eating away at me as I waited for her to show up. When she finally walked in, my breath caught in my throat. She looked tired, worn down, but still beautiful. She sat down across from me, and for the first time in months, there was a sense of calm between us. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "About everything. About us." I held my breath, waiting for her to continue. "I don't know if I can ever forget what you did," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I do know that I still love you. And for the sake of our family, I'm willing to try to move forward. But it's going to take time. A lot of time." Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded, unable to find the right words. This wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. A glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. After that conversation at the cafe, things didn't change overnight. It was clear from the start that Emma wasn't ready to just forgive and forget. We both knew that rebuilding our marriage was going to be a long, painful process, but the fact that she was willing to try gave me hope. We agreed to start with small steps. Emma moved back into the house, but she stayed in the guest room. It was strange, having her so close but still feeling that emotional distance between us. Every interaction was careful, almost rehearsed. We kept things light, talking about the kids, about logistics, but avoiding anything deeper. It was as if we were afraid that one wrong word could shatter the fragile truce we had managed to create. Emma set clear boundaries. We would take things slowly, focusing on communication. She wasn't ready for physical intimacy, and I respected that. It wasn't easy, though. There were moments when I wanted to reach out and hold her, to remind her of the love we had shared, but I knew that wasn't the answer. If I pushed too hard, I would lose her completely. We started attending couples therapy once a week, something I had suggested months ago but she had only now agreed to. Sitting in that room with a therapist, facing the mess I had created, was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I had to own my mistakes, admit to the hurt I had caused, and face Emma's anger, her pain. The therapist guided us through difficult conversations, helping us to express what we had both been holding back for so long. In those sessions, Emma revealed just how deep my betrayal had cut her. "It wasn't just the affair," she said one day, her voice shaking. "It was the fact that you lied to me, that you hid it for so long. You made me doubt everything, Alex. Our whole marriage." Her words hit me hard, but I knew she was right. It wasn't just the act of cheating that had damaged us. It was the loss of trust. And trust, I realized, was going to be the hardest thing to rebuild. Over the next few months, we slowly began to reconnect. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks. Moments when Emma would pull away, memories of my betrayal surfacing and reopening old wounds. Sometimes, I could see it in her eyes, that doubt, the fear that I would hurt her again. But we pushed through. We spent more time together as a family, going on outings with the kids, trying to create new memories that weren't overshadowed by the past. I could see that Emma was trying, but I also knew that part of her was still holding back, protecting herself from more pain. She had every right to. There were nights when we would sit together in the living room watching a movie or just talking. Those were the moments when I felt like maybe, just maybe, we were starting to find our way back to each other. Emma would laugh at something the kids had done, or smile at a memory, and for a fleeting second, it felt like the old days. But then the shadow of what I had done would creep in, and the distance between us would return. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Emma and I sat outside on the porch, the cool night air wrapping around us. It was quiet, the only sound coming from the rustle of leaves in the wind. She looked over at me, her expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice soft, "about why this happened." I tensed, unsure of where the conversation was going. "Emma, I've told you 100 times, it was a mistake." "I know," she interrupted, holding up a hand. "But I want to understand why. Why did you feel the need to stray?" I swallowed hard, unsure of how to answer. The truth was, I didn't fully understand it myself. I had been selfish, careless, and it had cost me everything. "I guess I felt disconnected," I admitted quietly. "We weren't in a good place. I felt like we were drifting apart, and instead of facing that, I looked for something to fill the void." Emma nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "We were disconnected," she agreed. "But I didn't think you'd give up on us. I didn't think you'd find comfort in someone else." Hearing her say that, the pain in her voice nearly broke me. "I'm sorry, Emma. I know I failed you. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you, if you'll let me." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked out into the darkness, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of her glass. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she sighed. "I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm trying. I'm really trying." That night marked a turning point for us. It wasn't a sudden breakthrough or a magical moment where everything was suddenly better. But it was the first time we had truly talked about the affair without it turning into a fight or a flood of tears. It was raw, honest, and painful, but it was also necessary. We had to face the hurt, the betrayal, if we had any chance of moving forward. In the weeks that followed, Emma and I continued to work on our relationship. Therapy became less about rehashing the past and more about figuring out how to move forward. We talked about our needs, our fears, and our hopes for the future. I realized how much I had taken Emma for granted, how I had let the everyday stresses of life pull us apart instead of bringing us closer. Slowly, very slowly, Emma began to let her guard down. It wasn't all at once, and there were still moments of doubt, but I could see that she was starting to trust me again. It was in the small things, her letting me hold her hand, the way she smiled at me when I made a joke, or the way she would lean her head on my shoulder when we were sitting on the couch. These moments gave me hope that we could rebuild what I had destroyed. One night, months after she had first moved back into the house, Emma came into our bedroom and stood at the foot of the bed. I looked up from my book, surprised to see her there, And for a moment, I wasn't sure what to say. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she walked over to the side of the bed and sat down next to me, her fingers brushing against mine. "I think I'm ready," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I swallowed hard, not daring to move. "Ready for what?" "To be with you again," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "To try and rebuild us." I stared at her, hardly believing what I was hearing. For so long, I had feared that this day would never come, that Emma would never be able to forgive me. And while I knew we still had a long way to go, this was a step, one I hadn't thought would come so soon. I reached for her hand, my heart racing. "Emma, don't say anything," she interrupted softly. "Let's just take it slow." And so we did. That night was the first time in months that we had shared the same bed, the first time we had been truly close. It wasn't just about physical intimacy. It was about reconnecting, about finding each other again after being lost for so long. In the months that followed, things continued to improve, but it wasn't without its challenges. There were still moments of doubt, moments when Emma would pull back, and I would have to remind myself that trust takes time to rebuild. But we were making progress, one step at a time. We continued therapy, not because we were still in crisis, but because it helped us communicate better, helped us understand each other's needs and fears. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I wondered if we would ever fully heal from what had happened. But the more we worked at it, the more I realized that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning to live with it, learning to forgive, and finding a way to move forward together. One day, Emma and I took the kids to the park, and as we sat on a bench watching them play, she leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were going to be okay. "I think we're going to make it," Emma said softly, her hand slipping into mine. I smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "I think so too." It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a new beginning. And for now, that was enough. Though Emma and I had begun to rebuild our relationship, the journey was anything but linear. Some days felt like we were finding our rhythm again, the way we laughed together, the way she'd touch my hand without thinking. But then, there were other days when the shadows of the past would creep in. Emma would grow distant, her eyes clouded with doubt, and I would feel the cold barrier between us rise again. One particular night, a few months after she had returned to our bedroom, Emma sat up in bed long after we had turned out the lights. I could hear her breathing, slow and uneven, as if she was lost in her own thoughts. I turned to her, reaching out to touch her arm gently. "What's wrong?" I asked softly, though I already knew the answer. She didn't answer immediately. Her silence filled the room, thick with the weight of everything unsaid. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. "Do you ever think about her?" she asked, her words barely above a whisper. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't the first time she had asked, but it had been a while since the last time we'd spoken about Natalie. I had done everything in my power to erase that chapter from my life, to show Emma that she was the only one that mattered. But I knew that the memory of my betrayal still haunted her, even if she didn't say it every day. "No," I replied, my voice steady but gentle. "I don't. I only think about you." Emma nodded slowly, but I could tell my answer didn't fully reassure her. She turned away, lying back down and pulling the blanket tighter around herself. I lay there beside her, feeling the distance between us, even though we were inches apart. It was moments like these that made me realize how deep the scars ran, and how much time we still had ahead of us before those wounds could even begin to heal. In the morning, things would return to normal, or at least to the new version of normal we had created. But the night's conversation lingered in my mind, a reminder that, while we were moving forward, the echoes of doubt still lived between us. As time passed, the moments of doubt came less frequently, but they never fully disappeared. We had both become experts at avoiding the topic of Natalie. It was like an unspoken rule. If we didn't talk about her, maybe she wouldn't continue to haunt our lives. But I knew that Emma still carried the weight of that betrayal with her, even if she tried to hide it. One afternoon, I came home from work to find Emma sitting at the kitchen table, staring at something on her phone. She didn't hear me come in, so I stood there for a moment watching her. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a tension in her posture that sent a chill down my spine. I walked over, trying to act casual, though my mind was already racing. "Hey," I said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "What are you looking at?" Emma flinched slightly, as if I had startled her. She quickly locked her phone and set it down on the table, but not before I caught a glimpse of what was on the screen. My heart sank. It was Natalie's social media profile. She didn't look at me as she stood up, busying herself with something at the counter. "Just scrolling," she said, her voice tight. I stood there, frozen for a moment. The last thing I wanted was to bring up Natalie, but I couldn't just ignore it. I walked over to her, placing my hands on her shoulders, feeling the tension in her body. "Emma," I began cautiously, "why were you looking at her profile?" She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "Sometimes, I need to see her, to remind myself that she's real. That what happened between you two wasn't just some nightmare I made up." Her words hit me hard, like a punch to the gut. I had hoped that with time, she would stop thinking about Natalie, that the ghost of my mistake would eventually fade. But it was clear that the past was still very much present in her mind. "I'm sorry," I whispered, turning her to face me. "Emma, I've done everything I can to show you that she's not part of my life anymore. She never will be. I love you. Only you." Emma looked up at me, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I know you say that, Alex, but how do I really know? How can I ever be sure?" I didn't have an answer for that. No matter how many times I apologized, no matter how many reassurances I gave, I couldn't change the fact that I had broken her trust. And trust, once shattered, was nearly impossible to fully rebuild. "I guess you can't," I admitted softly. "All I can do is keep proving it to you, every single day." Emma nodded, her expression softening, though the sadness in her eyes remained. "I want to believe you," she said. "I really do." I pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly, hoping that somehow my embrace could convey what words couldn't. But I knew that no matter how close we got, there would always be that sliver of doubt, that small part of her that would never fully trust me again. As months turned into a year, Emma and I found a new rhythm. Our relationship, though far from perfect, had stabilized. The emotional roller coaster had evened out, and while the doubts still lingered, they didn't dominate our lives like they once had. We were functioning again, and our children seemed happier, no longer picking up on the tension between us. But then, something happened that threw everything back into chaos. It was a typical workday, and I was wrapping up a project when I received an unexpected email. The subject line made my stomach churn. "Hey, it's been a while." I didn't even need to open it to know who it was from. "Natalie." My hands hovered over the mouse, hesitating. Part of me wanted to delete the email immediately, to pretend I had never seen it. But another part of me, a darker, more curious part, wanted to know what she had to say. I told myself it wouldn't hurt to just read it. After all, what harm could come from a few lines of text? I clicked on the email, my heart pounding as I read her message. "Hey Alex, I know it's been a long time, and I've been thinking about everything that happened. I hope you're doing okay. I just wanted to reach out and see how things are with you. Maybe we could catch up sometime?" It was short, simple, and completely innocent on the surface. But the implication was clear. Natalie was trying to re-enter my life. For a long time, I sat there, staring at the email, unsure of what to do. My gut told me to delete it and never think about it again, but there was a small, dangerous part of me that felt curious. Why was she reaching out now? Did she miss me? Did she regret what happened between us? I closed the email, deciding not to respond. But the temptation lingered in the back of my mind like a slow-burning ember. I didn't tell Emma about it, knowing that even mentioning Natalie's name would reopen old wounds. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this email was a test of my loyalty, of my commitment to Emma and our fragile marriage. The next few weeks passed uneventfully, but the memory of Natalie's email stayed with me. Every time I checked my inbox, I half expected to see another message from her, but none came. Still, the temptation nagged at me, a constant reminder of how easily I could throw everything away again. Emma noticed something was off. She had always been good at reading me, and lately, I had been more distant, more distracted. I tried to hide it, to put on a brave face, but she wasn't fooled. One evening, after we had put the kids to bed, she cornered me in the kitchen, her eyes searching mine. "Alex, is there something you're not telling me?" she asked, her voice calm but tinged with worry. I froze, my mind racing. Should I tell her about the email? I knew that honesty was the only way to truly rebuild her trust, but I was terrified that even the mention of Natalie's name would undo all the progress we had made. "No," I said, forcing a smile. "Everything's fine." Emma studied me for a long moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. I could tell she didn't believe me, but she didn't press the issue. Instead, she just nodded and walked away, leaving me alone with the weight of my lie. That night, as I lay in bed next to her, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing at a crossroads. On one side was the life I had with Emma, the life I had fought so hard to rebuild. On the other side was the temptation of the unknown, the danger that Natalie represented. I had already made one terrible mistake that nearly cost me everything. The question was, would I make another? The lie sat heavy in my chest, growing larger with every passing day. I hadn't responded to Natalie's email, but the fact that I hadn't told Emma about it began to eat away at me. It was a slippery slope. I had learned that the hard way before. But even though I knew this, I couldn't bring myself to come clean. I feared it would unravel everything we'd worked so hard to rebuild. But Emma could sense it. She was more distant, more quiet, and I could feel the tension between us returning, like a dark cloud creeping back into our lives. It was as if the connection we had slowly begun to restore was once again slipping through my fingers, and I was powerless to stop it. One evening, about 2 weeks after the email arrived, Emma came into the living room where I was sitting on the couch. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching me in silence. I could feel her eyes on me, and when I looked up, her expression was unreadable. "We need to talk," she said softly, stepping into the room. My heart sank. Those words, "we need to talk," never led to anything good. I nodded, setting aside the TV remote, and she sat down across from me, her hands folded in her lap. "I feel like you're hiding something from me," she began, her voice calm but firm. "And I can't live like this anymore, Alex. I can't live in a marriage where I'm constantly wondering if there's something you're not telling me." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. This was exactly what I had been afraid of. I opened my mouth to speak, to try to reassure her, but she held up her hand, stopping me. "I don't want more lies," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "If there's something going on, if there's something I need to know, you need to tell me. Now." I could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear that had been there since the day she found out about the affair. She had spent so much time trying to rebuild her trust in me, but now that trust was crumbling again, and it was my fault. I took a deep breath, my heart racing as I tried to find the right words. The truth hovered on the edge of my lips, begging to be spoken, but I hesitated. I had already betrayed her once. Could I really do it again, even if this time it was only with a lie of omission? "Emma," I started, my voice shaking slightly. "There's something I should tell you." She sat up straighter, her eyes wide, as if she were bracing herself for the worst. "I got an email," I continued, my throat tightening. "From Natalie." Emma's face went pale. Her hands clenched into fists on her lap, and for a long moment, she didn't say anything. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "What did she say?" "She just reached out. She said she wanted to know how I was doing. Asked if we could catch up sometime." I swallowed hard, watching her reaction closely. "But I didn't respond, Emma. I swear to you I didn't." Emma stared at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and disbelief. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I don't know," I admitted, feeling a wave of shame wash over me. "I didn't want to hurt you. I thought if I just ignored it, it would go away. I didn't think." "You didn't think?" she repeated, her voice growing louder. her anger finally breaking through. You didn't think about me. You didn't think about how this would make me feel. You just decided, once again, to hide something from me. I'm sorry, I said quickly, standing up and reaching for her, but she pulled away from me. Sorry? She scoffed, her eyes narrowing. You promised me, Alex. You promised me that there wouldn't be any more secrets. How am I supposed to believe anything you say now? My chest tightened as I watched her get up and walk toward the door. My mind raced, desperate to find a way to fix this, to keep her from slipping away from me again. Emma, please, I called after her, but she didn't stop. I need time to think, she said over her shoulder, her voice cold. And with that, she disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone in the silence of the living room, the weight of my mistake pressing down on me like a heavy stone. The next few days were filled with an unbearable tension. Emma barely spoke to me, avoiding eye contact and keeping her distance. It was like living with a stranger. The kids could sense something was wrong again, but we both tried to put on a brave face for their sake. Every time I saw her, I wanted to reach out, to hold her, to make everything right. But the gap between us felt like an insurmountable chasm, and I was terrified that if I pushed too hard, I would lose her for good. On the third day, Emma finally broke the silence. We were sitting at the dinner table, the kids upstairs playing, when she set down her fork and looked directly at me, her face unreadable. We can't go on like this, Alex, she said quietly. I've tried. I've really tried to move past everything, to trust you again. But I don't know if I can. Not after this. My heart sank. Emma, please. I began, but she held up her hand. Let me finish, she said, her voice firm but trembling slightly. I can't keep living in this constant state of suspicion. It's exhausting. I need to know that I can trust you, that you're not going to hurt me again. I'm not going to, I said quickly, reaching across the table to take her hand. I love you, Emma. I've made mistakes, I know that, but I'm committed to you, to us. I won't let anything come between us again. She looked down at my hand, her expression softening for a brief moment before she pulled her hand away. I want to believe you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I don't know if I can, and I can't live like this anymore. So I'm giving you a choice. I froze, the words catching in my throat. What do you mean? Emma took a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine. If you want this to work, Alex, if you truly want to rebuild our marriage, you need to cut off all contact with Natalie. Permanently. Block her, delete her from your life. Completely. And you need to tell me if anything like this ever happens again. No more lies, no more secrets. Her ultimatum hit me hard, but I knew she was right. This was my chance, my final chance, to prove to her that I was serious about us, about our future. If I didn't take it, I would lose her forever. I'll do it, I said firmly, meeting her gaze. I'll block her. I'll delete her from everything. I don't want her in my life. I only want you. Emma nodded slowly, but I could see the doubt still lingering in her eyes. I hope you mean that, Alex, she said softly, because if this happens again, I'm done. Her words hung heavy in the air, and I knew she meant them. This was my final chance, and I couldn't afford to mess it up. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, I sat in the living room with my phone in hand, staring at the screen. Natalie's email was still there, untouched, and my finger hovered over the block button. I knew what I had to do, but for some reason, I hesitated. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was pride, but part of me wanted to send one last message, to explain myself, to say goodbye. But then I thought of Emma, of everything we had gone through, everything we had fought for. I thought of her ultimatum, her pain, her trust that I was so close to losing forever. Without another thought, I blocked Natalie. Then I deleted her email, her contact, everything. I wiped her from my life, just as I had promised. As I sat there in the quiet of the living room, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't just about getting rid of Natalie. It was about making a choice. A choice to be better, to put Emma and our family first. When I finally went to bed that night, Emma was already asleep. I lay down beside her, pulling her close, and for the first time in weeks I felt like maybe just maybe, we were going to make it through this. In the weeks that followed, things between Emma and me slowly began to improve. Blocking Natalie wasn't a magical fix, but it was a necessary first step. For the first time in what felt like years, there were no more secrets between us. The weight of my past mistakes still lingered, but the shadows began to recede, little by little. Emma noticed. I could feel her starting to relax again, allowing herself to be vulnerable with me, though it was a slow, careful process. Our therapy sessions became less about dissecting the past and more about planning for the future. We started talking about things we had put off for so long. Vacations we wanted to take, projects around the house, even small things like family movie nights. The simplicity of it felt like a healing balm for both of us. There were still moments when the doubt would creep back into Emma's eyes, especially during quiet moments late at night. Sometimes, I'd catch her staring off into the distance, lost in thought, and I knew she was thinking about everything we'd been through. But she no longer looked at me with the same suspicion, the same hurt. Slowly, she was learning to trust me again, and I didn't take a single moment of that trust for granted. One evening, we were sitting together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The kids were playing in the yard, their laughter filling the air, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace. "I think we're going to be okay," Emma said quietly, her hand resting in mine. I looked at her, seeing the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. Strong, beautiful, and resilient. I had nearly lost her, nearly destroyed everything we had built, but somehow we had made it through. "I know we will," I said softly, squeezing her hand. "Thank you, Emma, for giving me another chance." She smiled, a genuine warm smile that made my heart ache. "We've been through a lot, Alex, but I still believe in us, and I'm ready to keep fighting for our future." The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would still be challenges, moments of doubt, and the occasional echoes of the past. But for the first time in a long time, I knew we were on the right path. We were rebuilding, not just our marriage, but our trust, our connection, our love. As the sun disappeared behind the horizon, I pulled Emma close, wrapping my arm around her. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt whole again.